I now invite His Excellency António Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, to address the conference.
Your Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. This conference was originally scheduled to January 2022. The sudden cancellation due to the Omicron wave of the COVID-19 pandemic was yet another reminder that the world is subject to constant and unexpected change. And indeed, since then, we have seen the eruption of war in Ukraine with a devastating impact on Ukrainians, but also on least developed countries struggling with skyrocketing food and energy costs. Meanwhile, global tensions and divides are deepening, and so we must find ways to come together. And there is perhaps no more important issue around which we can and must unite than in transforming the words of the Doha Programme of Action into results. We don't have a moment to lose. Least developed countries are being stranded amidst a rising tide of crisis, uncertainty, climate chaos, and deep global injustice. They are unable to keep pace with lightning speed technological change. Systems are stretched from health and education to social protection, infrastructure, and job creation. Unemployment is rising, especially among young people, and women are being pushed to the sidelines. And the deeply dysfunctional and unfair global financial system is handing least developed countries the rawest of deals. Least developed countries face interest rates that are up to 8 times higher than developed countries, and it is only getting worse. Today, 25 developing economies are spending over 20% of government revenues not on building schools, not on feeding people, not on expanding opportunities for women and girls, but solely on servicing debt. Some have seen debt service payments skyrocket by 35%. So, Excellencies, least developed countries need a revolution of support across 3 key areas. First, they need immediate assistance to rescue the Sustainable Development Goals. For least developed countries, these goals represent survival in itself, from poverty eradication to food, health, clean water and sanitation. The September's SDG Summit is the centerpiece moment to demonstrate a global commitment for action. We have put forward and presented to the G20 an SDG stimulus to alter or to gather the world around the need to provide at least $500 billion a year to developing countries. And it's also high time that developed countries live up to their commitment to provide least developed countries with 0.15 to 0.20% of their gross national income for official development assistance. No more excuses. We must also expand international efforts to fight tax evasion, money laundering, and illicit financial flows that drain domestic resources. While no country or region is immune, lower-income countries lose a much higher proportion of their tax revenues to tax abuse, while having the least influence on global taxation rules. Least developed countries also need funding and support for structural transformation to climb the value chain, to massively invest in manufacturing and technological capabilities and better infrastructure and transportation networks, to give women a seat at decision-making tables of government, business and civic life, to invest in education and training, to generate a highly skilled workforce, and to strengthen institutions. The Doha Programme of Action is a practical guide to address all these issues. It contains concrete targets and deliverables, such as a sustainable graduation support facility, an investment support center, and an online university, which can play a game-changing role in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals in least developing countries. And so I call upon development partners to support the implementation of these deliveries and the achievement of the Doha Programme of Action targets. Second, we need to reform the global financial system through a new Bretton Woods moment. International financial institutions must develop creative ways to extending financing where the needs are greatest. And this includes expanding contingency financing and integrating disaster and pandemic clauses into debt instruments. It is also time to accelerate the reallocation of special drawing rights from the richest countries that receive the most to those who need help the most. Multilateral development banks should transform their business model to massive leverage funds to attract greater flows of private finance at reasonable cost into developing countries, in particular the least developed ones. And we must find new common sense ways to measure countries' economies, such as developing lending criteria that go beyond gross domestic product, to provide a true view of the value of natural capital, such as the preservation of forests, watersheds, and marine resources. Et troisièmement,
and thirdly, the least developed countries need a climate action support revolution. They produce less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It is, alas, tragic that close to 7 deaths in every 10 due to climate disasters happen in these countries. Developed countries must increase their support to the least developed countries to help them to adapt, to increase their resilience to climate change, and to transition more swiftly to renewable energy. They must honour the promise they made to mobilise $100 billion for developing countries and to simplify access to climate action financing. Make the Loss and Damage Fund agreed on at the last COP operational. Honour the commitment to multiply by 2 adaptation finance, to replenish the Green Climate Fund to more ambitious levels. They must, in the next 5 years, support the creation of early warning systems for everyone in the world. And in September, I will convene a summit on climate ambition. This will be an opportunity for governments, companies, and civil society to move from words to actions when it comes to their net zero emissions commitments and to guarantee climate justice for the most affected populations. I'm also calling for a climate solidarity pact in order to mobilise financial and technical support to ramp up the transition of emerging economies to renewable energy and to keep the 1.5 degree goal alive. Your Highness, Excellencies, the era of unkept promises must come to an end. Now. Let us give their rightful place to the needs of the least developed countries at the very heart of our projects, our priorities, and our investments. Thank you.